One rainy night, a weary officer spotted a stray dog trembling by the roadside. When he reached for its collar, what he found sent a chill down his spine, a name from his past, buried years ago. How could this be possible, and what message was this lost soul carrying back to him? Every evening, Officer Daniel Hayes would drive through the peaceful, quiet streets of Willow Creek, a small town where life moved gently and people still waved at each other from their front porches. The streets would glow softly under the amber lights, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. It was a place where children rode their bicycles till dusk, and old men gathered at the diner to share stories from the past. And in those peaceful moments, Daniel's thoughts would always drift to his old dog Sam, a magnificent German shepherd with eyes as deep and understanding as the night sky. Sam wasn't just a pet to Daniel, he was his closest friend, his partner in every sense of the word. From the moment Daniel first met Sam at the police canine training facility, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't just about commands and obedience, it was a connection built on trust, love and silent understanding. Sam was the kind of dog who would sense Daniel's moods without a word being spoken. When Daniel was tense or troubled, Sam would nuzzle close, resting his head on Daniel's knee as if to say, "I'm here." And through countless days and nights, through storms and quiet sunsets, they faced the world side by side. The town knew Sam as well as they knew Daniel. Kids would run to pet him, giggling when his tail wagged like a banner in the wind. Store owners kept treats behind the counter for him. During town parades, Sam proudly marched at Daniel's side, wearing a small badge on his collar. He wasn't just a police dog, he was a symbol of loyalty and courage in a town that valued those things more than gold. There were countless times when Sam had shown bravery no one could forget. Daniel remembered one freezing winter night when a child went missing in the woods. Snow fell in heavy sheets, and darkness crept in quickly. The search teams were losing hope, but Sam pressed on, his nose to the ground, ignoring the cold. Hours later, Sam found the child curled beneath a tree, cold but alive, and Daniel knew then that there was no creature more loyal or determined. Another evening, during a dangerous drug bust on the outskirts of town, it was Sam who sensed danger lurking in the shadows. A man with a weapon waited, hoping to ambush the officers, but Sam's sharp instincts saved them all. In those moments of peril, Daniel felt a silent reassurance, knowing Sam was near. But time, as it does, moved relentlessly forward. Sam began to age. His once boundless energy faded into slow, careful steps. The playful runs became gentle strolls. His sharp bark softened to a quiet sigh. Daniel saw the signs, the struggle to climb into the patrol car, the longer naps under the old oak tree in their backyard. The day Daniel had long feared came quietly, as the sun dipped behind the horizon 3 years ago. In a warm, quiet room, Daniel held Sam close, whispering words of love and gratitude, tears falling freely as Sam took his final breath. It felt as though a piece of Daniel's soul left with him. The drive home that night was the loneliest Daniel had ever known. The empty seat beside him seemed to echo with memories of the loyal companion it had once held. The town mourned with him. Children left drawings of Sam at the police station. Families brought flowers. A plaque was placed at the department's entrance in Sam's honor, etched with the words, "Forever a hero." Now every evening as Daniel drives through those same streets, he feels Sam's presence in the rustle of the trees and the soft whispers of the wind. He speaks to Sam in quiet moments, sharing stories of the day's events, the new rookie at the station, the elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, or the mischievous cat causing a stir at the bakery. Some might find it strange, but to Daniel, these conversations are sacred, a thread connecting him to a part of his heart he refuses to let go. On the anniversary of Sam's passing, Daniel visits a simple grave under the towering oak tree by the meadow they loved. He brings Sam's favorite worn chew toy, placing it gently on the ground, and sits in silence, recalling every memory. In dreams, Daniel still sees Sam running through sunlit fields, his coat gleaming, his eyes full of life, and those moments bring both comfort and pain. The bond they shared was something pure and rare, forged in silent understanding and unwavering loyalty. Daniel often tells others that no human could teach him more about love, bravery, and kindness than Sam did. Though years pass, Sam remains a part of him, an echo in every quiet evening, in every sunset over Willow Creek, and in every heartbeat that remembers a friend now gone, but never forgotten. It was a cold, rainy night in Willow Creek, the kind of evening when the streets glistened under the glow of the street lamps, and the steady patter of raindrops on the patrol car roof made the world feel quiet and distant. Officer Daniel Hayes was on his usual rounds, driving slowly through familiar roads, his thoughts drifting to memories of Sam, his loyal German Shepherd partner, who had passed away 3 years earlier. The grief of losing Sam had never quite left him. Though time moved on, Daniel's heart still carried a heavy emptiness. And on nights like this, with the wind whispering through the trees and shadows dancing across the pavement, that emptiness seemed to deepen. The rain blurred the windshield, and Daniel squinted ahead, watching the deserted street, when suddenly something caught his eye. A figure darted across the road, illuminated briefly in the glare of his headlights. Daniel's heart leapt. It was a dog. Not just any dog, but one that looked so much like Sam that it made his breath catch in his throat. The strong, proud build, the thick fur slicked with rain, and those deep, knowing amber eyes. It was as though time itself had folded, and Sam was standing before him once again. Daniel felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. His mind raced with impossible thoughts. Could it be? He pulled the patrol car to a stop and stepped out into the downpour, his boots splashing in puddles as he approached carefully, not wanting to frighten the animal. The dog stood still in the middle of the road, shivering slightly, water dripping from its muzzle, but its gaze remained locked on Daniel. There was something deeply familiar in those eyes, not just in their color, but in the way they held him, as if they recognized him too. Daniel's throat tightened, memories crashing over him. He remembered long walks in the woods, lazy afternoons at the lake, and the warmth of Sam's head resting in his lap during stormy nights. Every step he took toward the dog felt like walking into a memory. As he got closer, he saw the dog wore a collar. His heart pounded as he reached out a trembling hand, unsure whether the animal would bolt or let him touch it. But the dog didn't move. It seemed to be waiting. Daniel's fingers closed around the damp collar, and his eyes struggled to read the tiny, weather-worn name tag in the dim light. His breath froze in his chest as he read the engraving, Sam Hayes. It was impossible. A wave of emotion crashed over him, shock, disbelief, longing, and an aching hope that maybe, just maybe, some things don't stay lost forever. His mind fought to make sense of it. How could a dog with his last name and Sam's name appear here on this night? Tears mixed with the rain on his face as he knelt beside the dog, speaking softly, his voice breaking. "Sam, is it really you, boy?" The dog's tail gave a faint wag, and he stepped closer, pressing his damp head against Daniel's chest. In that instant the world seemed to blur, the past and present melting together. Daniel wrapped his arms around the animal, feeling the warmth and the steady heartbeat against him. He didn't care how or why. In that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that the emptiness he'd carried for so long felt just a little less heavy. The dog smelled like wet fur and rain-soaked earth, and Daniel's heart filled with memories of their years together. He remembered the day he'd first met Sam, a scrappy, eager pup with 2 big paws and endless energy. They had trained together, worked side by side, and formed a bond no words could fully explain. Losing Sam had felt like losing a part of himself. And now, as the storm raged around them, he held this strange, familiar creature in his arms, unsure whether it was a miracle, a trick of fate, or the desperate imagining of a grieving heart. The dog leaned into him, a soft whimper escaping its throat. Daniel whispered promises he didn't entirely understand, swearing to never let him go again. Around them, the rain fell harder, but Daniel no longer felt the cold. The world, with all its noise and sorrow, seemed to fade away. There was only this moment, this strange, impossible reunion in the middle of an empty road, where a man burdened by loss and a dog who seemed impossibly familiar found one another in the darkness. Daniel knew he had to find out where this dog had come from, how he bore the same name and spirit as his lost friend, but for now, he let the questions wait. He gathered the dog gently in his arms and carried him to the patrol car, wrapping him in a dry blanket from the back seat. The dog's amber eyes never left his, as if he too was afraid this fragile moment might slip away. As Daniel drove slowly back toward town, the dog resting quietly beside him, his mind turned over every possibility. Could someone have named this dog after Sam? Could it be one of Sam's offspring? But deep down, Daniel felt something else, a stirring of the soul, a sense that life sometimes offers second chances in the most unexpected ways. As the lights of Willow Creek appeared in the distance, Daniel vowed to unravel the mystery, but he also promised himself one thing: no matter what he discovered, he wouldn't let this dog go, because in those amber eyes, he'd seen something more than coincidence, more than chance. He had felt the touch of an old familiar love, a reminder that sometimes, even in our darkest moments, the past finds a way to reach out and remind us we are not alone. And as the storm began to ease and the first hints of dawn glimmered on the horizon, Daniel felt a flicker of peace, a warmth he hadn't known in years. He glanced over at the sleeping dog and whispered, "Welcome home, Sam." Stunned, Daniel couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. His hands, still trembling, turned the small worn-out name tag attached to the collar around the dog's neck. The back of it read something that made his heart stop for a moment. His old address. The same house he had moved away from 3 years ago. The same house where he had buried Sam beneath the big oak tree in the backyard on that heartbreaking afternoon. It felt like the world had slowed down around him. The sound of the rain tapping against the car roof, the distant howl of the wind, and even his own heartbeat seemed to fade into a heavy silence. How could this be possible? Sam had been gone for 3 long years. Daniel remembered every detail of that day. The way the autumn leaves had fallen gently onto the ground, the final sorrowful look in Sam's eyes, and the promise Daniel had whispered as he covered his friend's resting place with earth. It wasn't the kind of memory that faded with time. It clung to him like a shadow. And now, here stood a dog, a mirror image of Sam, carrying a tag that should have been buried along with him. The logical part of Daniel's mind screamed for answers, trying to grasp at any explanation. Could it be someone playing a cruel trick, or a strange coincidence? Another dog who looked just like Sam, and somehow had his tag. But deep down, Daniel felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't fear. It wasn't just confusion. It was a strange kind of knowing, an unspoken message that reached into his soul. The dog's eyes, those deep amber eyes, looked right into him, as if recognizing every line of his face, every beat of his heart. Without thinking, Daniel opened the passenger door, and the dog, now soaking wet and shivering, climbed in as if he belonged there. Water dripped onto the car seat, but Daniel didn't care. He started the engine and turned the heater on, his hands still unsteady. Questions raced through his mind faster than he could catch them. Where had this dog come from? Why now after all these years? And how did he have that collar, that tag, with Daniel's old address? He reached out and gently stroked the dog's wet fur. It was soft, familiar, carrying that old scent of rain and earth that Daniel remembered from countless nights patrolling Willow Creek with Sam by his side. The dog leaned into his touch, closing its eyes for a moment. Daniel felt a lump rising in his throat. It had to be Sam. He wanted to believe it was Sam, but how could it be? Was this a sign from beyond? Had Sam somehow found his way back to him? Or was it something else, something stranger, that couldn't be explained by the simple rules of the world Daniel thought he knew? The rain poured heavier as he drove back to his small house on Meadow Lane, his headlights barely cutting through the curtain of water. Every turn he made on those empty streets brought back memories of Sam. The time they chased down a burglar together, the late-night coffee stops, the long silent rides where just the presence of that loyal dog made Daniel feel less alone. Each memory weighed heavily on him now, blurring the line between past and present. The dog sat quietly beside him, occasionally glancing at Daniel with those knowing eyes. It wasn't just the look of a dog seeking shelter, it was a look that spoke of stories shared and secrets kept. Daniel's heart ached with a mixture of grief, hope, and a deep gnawing sadness he hadn't felt since the day he buried Sam. He found himself talking aloud, as if the years hadn't passed. "Is it you, buddy?" he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. The dog responded with a soft whimper, leaning its head against Daniel's shoulder, just the way Sam used to do when he sensed his partner's worries. Daniel swallowed hard, unsure whether he was losing his grip on reality, or if something extraordinary was happening. The streets of Willow Creek blurred past the window, lit only by flickering streetlights and the ghostly glow of the storm. As the car rolled into the driveway, Daniel hesitated. He glanced down at the tag again, tracing the faded letters with his thumb. It was his old address. There was no mistake. The memories of that old house flooded his mind. The creaking porch swing, the scent of lilac in spring, and the sight of Sam chasing after leaves in the backyard. He hadn't been back there since the day he left, unable to bear the emptiness of a home without Sam's warmth. Now, a dog carrying that life, that memory, had returned to him. Daniel didn't know what to do, but he couldn't leave the dog outside in the storm. He opened the door, and the dog followed him inside, shaking water onto the floor. The house, filled with the quiet hum of an old clock and the faint smell of coffee, suddenly felt alive again. The dog walked over to the couch, circling 3 times before settling down, just as Sam always did. Daniel stood there watching, a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope filling his chest. He tried to tell himself it was impossible, that this couldn't be his old friend, but deep down, he wanted it to be true more than anything else. Sitting down beside the dog, he reached for his phone, tempted to call someone, anyone, to share what was happening. But who would believe him? Who would understand what it meant for a man like him, haunted by memories, to have a piece of his past suddenly return in the middle of a storm? The minutes stretched into hours, as Daniel sat in silence, the storm continuing to rage outside. His mind wrestled with the unanswerable questions. Could it be Sam? Had the world given him another chance, or was it a trick of fate? Every glance from the dog, every familiar gesture, made the impossible feel just a little more possible. And as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Daniel realized something he hadn't admitted to himself before. Whether it was truly Sam or not, it didn't matter. In that quiet house, with the dog by his side, he wasn't alone anymore. The ache in his heart felt a little less sharp. The emptiness of those long, lonely nights seemed to fade into the background. And though the questions would linger, unanswered and heavy, Daniel was ready to face them. Because sometimes, life didn't offer explanations. Sometimes, it just gave you a second chance when you needed it most. The story wasn't over. Not yet. At the police station, Daniel carefully carried the wet and trembling dog inside. Wrapping him gently in a spare jacket he kept in the back of his patrol car. The warmth of the jacket calmed the animal a little, though his eyes still darted nervously around the unfamiliar surroundings. The bright lights of the station and the hum of voices didn't seem to scare the dog as much as one might expect. It was almost as if he had been there before. A few officers at their desks noticed Daniel walking in with the dog and chuckled, making light jokes about him adopting strays on duty. "Lost your partner again, Hayes?" one teased. Another laughed. "Is that your new rookie?" Daniel managed a weak smile, but couldn't bring himself to join in the laughter. He knew deep inside that this wasn't just any stray. There was something about this dog, the way he walked beside him without hesitation, the calm, almost knowing look in his deep amber eyes. It reminded Daniel so much of Sam that it made his chest ache. He felt foolish for even thinking it, but every instinct screamed that there was more to this than met the eye. He guided the dog into the break room, away from the noise of the main floor, and sat him down on a worn couch. The dog sat obediently, his gaze fixed on Daniel as if waiting for instructions. Daniel reached for his phone with trembling hands and snapped a clear photo of the dog's tag. The name engraved on it, Sam Hayes, seemed to glow under the harsh light. His heart pounded in his ears. How could this be? He took a deep breath and, without overthinking, sent the picture to his ex-wife Sarah. They hadn't spoken much since their divorce, but he knew she would remember. After all, Sarah was the one who had ordered that very tag years ago. They had buried it with Sam when the dog passed away, marking the end of a chapter they both struggled to close. Minutes later, his phone buzzed with a message notification. He hesitated before unlocking the screen, his pulse racing. Sarah's message was short but heavy with emotion. "That can't be. We buried that with him." The words struck Daniel like a bolt of lightning. A cold shiver ran down his spine. His hands felt clammy, and his throat tightened. Memories of the rainy afternoon at Willow Creek Pet Cemetery flashed through his mind. The small gathering, Sarah's tear-streaked face, the old collar with the tag placed tenderly on top of Sam's final resting place. It had been one of the hardest days of his life. He had stood there silently as the earth was returned over the wooden box, feeling as if he was burying a piece of his soul alongside his loyal friend. How could this tag be here now, around the neck of a living, breathing dog that looked exactly like Sam? Daniel struggled to steady his thoughts. He reached out and stroked the dog's head, his fingers brushing over the familiar fur pattern. The dog leaned into his touch, closing his eyes in quiet trust. It was a gesture so reminiscent of Sam that tears welled up in Daniel's eyes. His mind raced with impossible explanations. Could someone have stolen the tag from the grave and placed it on a look-alike dog? But why? And how would anyone even know where to find it? Or worse, could this somehow be Sam? His rational side rejected the thought instantly. Sam had died. Daniel had seen him lowered into the ground. He remembered the stillness, the lifeless body, the final goodbye. And yet, here sat a dog with the same face, the same markings, the same amber eyes that had once followed him through every call, every patrol, every lonely night in the squad car. The dog let out a soft whine and placed a paw on Daniel's knee, as if sensing his turmoil. Daniel felt his heart crack. This wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't a prank or a mistake. There was a connection here. Something mysterious that defied logic and reason. He took another shaky breath and called over one of the younger officers, Mark, to bring a bowl of water and some leftover sandwich meat from the fridge. Mark returned a minute later, still grinning about Daniel's new partner, but Daniel barely heard him. His world had narrowed down to the dog, the tag, and the memory of his long-lost friend. He fed the dog gently, watching how the animal ate with a mix of hunger and careful dignity, never snatching, never growling, the same good manners Sam had shown. The way he sat, the tilt of his head, even the small scar on his right ear was identical. It was too precise to be a coincidence. Daniel felt like he was staring into the past, reliving a piece of his life that he thought was gone forever. After the dog finished eating, Daniel took him outside for some air. The rain had stopped, and the streets shimmered under the glow of the streetlights. The town was quiet now, the usual evening hush settling over Willow Creek. The dog stayed close by his side, his pace matching Daniel's without needing a leash. He stopped at familiar spots, the alley behind the diner, the park bench by the old clock tower, places Sam used to visit during their patrols. Each time the dog would pause, sniff the air, and look up at Daniel as if confirming that he remembered too. The connection grew stronger with each step. Daniel found himself speaking to the dog as he once did with Sam, telling him about the new rookie officer, about the quiet cases lately, about how lonely things had felt since he was gone. The dog listened with those wise, steady eyes that never looked away. Daniel didn't know whether he was going mad or if some miracle had crossed his path. All he knew was that, for the first time in years, the ache in his chest felt a little lighter. Returning to the station, Daniel knew he couldn't leave the dog at the shelter. He filled out a temporary custody form, claiming responsibility until animal control could investigate. But in his heart, he already knew this dog wasn't going anywhere. He brought him home that night, to the same small house filled with old photographs and a chewed-up tennis ball still sitting on the back porch. The dog walked in like he belonged, heading straight for the spot by the fireplace where Sam had once curled up. He lay down with a sigh, resting his head on his paws. Daniel watched, his emotions tangled between grief and hope. He picked up the phone and called Sarah again, telling her everything. They spoke for hours, sharing memories, questions, and a quiet kind of peace neither had felt in years. In that moment, Daniel realized that sometimes the bonds we form in life are stronger than death, that love has a way of finding its way back to us even when we least expect it. Determined to uncover the truth behind this mysterious dog, Officer Daniel Hayes couldn't stop his heart from pounding as he gently carried the damp and shivering animal into the softly lit back room of the police station. Rain tapped against the windows like nature itself, urging him to hurry, and though the jokes and comments from fellow officers echoed in the background, Daniel's mind was focused only on the animal in his arms. The deep amber eyes of this dog haunted him in a way that words could hardly explain. It was as though he was looking into the past, seeing his loyal partner Sam once again, but the logical part of his mind fought against the impossible. How could it be? His Sam was gone, buried in a peaceful spot beneath the old oak tree behind his former home, a place Daniel hadn't visited since the funeral 3 years ago. Still, the sight of the name tag, the familiar shape of the ears, the powerful frame, and those eyes that seemed to recognize him all screamed something deeper, something beyond reason. Clutching a portable microchip scanner, Daniel carefully ran it along the dog's neck, praying for a clue, anything that might explain what was happening. A soft, almost hesitant beep broke the silence, startling even the other officers who had paused their conversations to watch. Daniel glanced at the small screen, expecting to see the name Sam Hayes, but instead the display showed a different name, Shadow. The name felt strange on his tongue, like a word from a foreign language or a memory half forgotten. The database listed an elderly woman named Martha Blake as the owner, with an address barely a few streets away from the station. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed his phone and dialed the number provided. His fingers trembled, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if it was from the cold rainwater still clinging to his skin or the storm of emotions brewing inside him. The line rang 3 times before a frail voice answered, her tone heavy with age and exhaustion. "Hello," the woman said, and Daniel introduced himself as an officer from the Willow Creek Police Department. He explained he had found a dog registered to her, asking if she owned a dog named Shadow. A gasp escaped the woman's lips, followed by a long pause, as though she struggled to find the words. Then she spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. Shadow's been missing for days," she whispered, her words carrying the weight of worry and heartbreak. "He vanished one evening after dinner. I searched everywhere, called shelters, put up posters, but it was as if he just disappeared into thin air." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He asked how long she had owned Shadow, expecting perhaps a year or 2, but the answer sent a shiver down his spine. "I've had him for 6 years, she said softly, her words barely audible. 6 years. That number struck Daniel like a hammer, for it was exactly 6 years ago that his beloved Sam had passed away. The coincidence was too sharp, too perfect to ignore. The dog before him, who carried the same deep amber eyes, the same stance, the same name tag that should have been buried with Sam, had belonged to this woman for precisely as long as Sam had been gone. The timing was not a matter of chance. Daniel's mind swirled with memories of that night 6 years ago, when he held Sam for the last time, tears mixing with the evening mist as the vet confirmed there was nothing more to be done. He remembered the way Sam's paw rested in his hand, the final flicker of life in those eyes that now stared back at him once more. Was this some strange twist of fate? A message from beyond? Or had Sam's spirit, unwilling to part from his partner, found a way back into the world through this dog named Shadow? Daniel tried to steady his breathing as he assured Martha that her dog was safe, and that she could come to the station to collect him. The old woman's gratitude was evident in every word she spoke, though she was too overcome with relief to say much more. When the call ended, Daniel remained seated, staring at the animal who now lay curled on a station blanket, eyes never leaving his. In those amber depths, Daniel saw more than a dog. He saw years of loyalty, unspoken promises, and a connection that refused to be severed by time, death, or distance. The room around him faded, the sounds of rain, radios, and distant conversations blending into a hum as he was transported back to memories of chasing suspects through dark alleys, long night shifts with only Sam for company, and the quiet moments where the weight of the world seemed lighter with a friend by his side. Shadow, or perhaps Sam, wagged his tail softly, as though understanding every thought running through Daniel's heart. For a moment, logic and reason no longer mattered. What mattered was the bond between man and dog, and how sometimes the connections we forge in this life are too strong for even death to break. Daniel decided then and there that he wouldn't let this mystery slip away. He would visit Martha, learn more about Shadow's life, and see if there were other signs, hints of a shared soul, traces of a life once lived, proof that perhaps, in some way beyond human understanding, Sam had found his way back to him. And even if the world called it coincidence, in Daniel's heart, he would know the truth, because some bonds are eternal, and some friends, no matter how far they roam, always find their way home. Daniel visited Sam's old grave under the grand ancient oak tree that stood watch over the land like a silent guardian. It was the same tree that had provided shade during long summer afternoons when Daniel, a younger man burdened by the demands of his badge, but healed by the presence of his loyal friend, would throw sticks and watch Sam leap joyfully into the air. Now the house was abandoned, the paint peeling from the walls, the windows clouded with dust, and the garden choked with weeds. The world had moved on, but this place, untouched by time, held memories like sacred relics. The rain had softened the earth, and the wind carried with it the scent of damp earth and forgotten days. Shadow, the stray with eyes so eerily familiar, followed quietly, his steps mirroring Daniel's as if drawn by an invisible tether. When Daniel reached the small gravestone, weathered by the years but still bearing the name Sam Hayes, he felt a heaviness in his chest. The grief, though dulled by time, resurfaced like a fresh wound. He knelt, brushing away the fallen leaves that clung to the stone, his fingers tracing the familiar letters, each stroke a memory. He remembered the night Sam was buried, the ache in his soul, the emptiness that echoed louder in the silence of the house, and how he had sworn he'd never love another creature like that again. But here was Shadow, sitting beside him, their eyes fixed on the same place, connected not by words but by a shared presence. In that moment, the world around them faded. No distant traffic, no radio chatter, no weight of unsolved cases. It was just a man, his memories, and a dog that seemed to carry pieces of a soul he thought long gone. The air felt charged, as if the veil between past and present had grown thin. Daniel spoke softly, his voice catching in his throat. "I miss you, buddy," he whispered. The wind stirred the branches above, and a single leaf drifted down, landing gently on the gravestone. Shadow's ears perked up, and for a second, Daniel could swear the dog's gaze was no longer that of a stray, but of an old friend returned. He didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but life in Willow Creek had always held its secrets. He thought about all the times Sam had guided him through dark nights, chasing criminals, finding lost children, or just keeping the loneliness at bay. And now, even after death, it felt like Sam had found a way to be with him. Daniel closed his eyes and let the memories flood in. Sam's eager bark when the patrol car's engine turned over, the way he'd nudged Daniel's hand for a treat after a long shift, and how, on that final day, Sam had rested his head on Daniel's lap as if to say goodbye. He opened his eyes to find Shadow still sitting close, the dog's amber eyes reflecting a deep, soulful calm. It wasn't Sam, he knew that, but it was as if some fragment of Sam's spirit lingered in this new companion. The thought brought an unexpected peace. Daniel reached out, scratching behind Shadow's ear, and felt the dog lean into his touch, accepting it not as a stranger, but as something long awaited. Time slipped by unnoticed, as the sky shifted from grey to a muted gold. The sun breaking through the clouds cast warm beams over the gravestone, illuminating the name like a sign from the beyond. Daniel took it as a message, not of sorrow, but of continuity, that love, loyalty and connection never truly die. As they sat there, Daniel spoke of old days, cases solved, rivers crossed, sunsets watched together, and mistakes made. The words tumbled out in a stream, the weight of unspoken grief unburdened at last. Shadow stayed, listening with a stillness that felt knowing. Daniel realized then that this wasn't just a stray he'd picked up on a rainy night. It was a thread connecting him to his past, a silent promise that some bonds stretch beyond life's edge. As evening deepened, Daniel felt lighter, as if some of the ache that had long lodged in his chest had finally eased. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees, and placed a hand on the gravestone. "Thank you, Sam," he murmured. Shadow rose too, and together they turned back toward the old path leading to the patrol car. The road ahead would be uncertain, filled with questions and memories, but Daniel knew one thing for sure: wherever it led, he wouldn't be walking it alone. As they left, the wind picked up, rustling the oak leaves overhead, and Daniel swore he heard the faint echo of a familiar bark carried on the breeze. He smiled, the first genuine smile in years, as peace finally nestled in his heart. The past was never truly gone. It walked beside you in different forms, sometimes in memories, sometimes in the eyes of a new friend, and sometimes in the quiet, persistent presence of a loyal heart reborn. Daniel barely slept that night. His mind circled endlessly around the strange encounter with the dog called Shadow, a dog who looked just like Sam, whose old tag bore Daniel's name and address, and whose origins now clung to mystery like a heavy fog, refusing to lift. The rain had washed the streets clean by morning, but the storm inside Daniel's heart hadn't subsided. Determined to find answers, he drove to Martha Blake's modest cottage on the outskirts of Willow Creek. The house stood with its weathered white fence and a blooming garden of wildflowers, as if untouched by the strange events of the night before. Martha greeted him with a mixture of surprise and relief, her aged face breaking into a tender, grateful smile when she saw Shadow trotting loyally beside Daniel. Tears shimmered in her tired eyes as she knelt down, embracing the dog she feared lost forever. "Oh my boy, you came home," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Daniel gently rested a hand on her shoulder but didn't leave immediately. A part of him clung to the gnawing question, the itch that refused to fade. "Martha," he began softly, "do you remember where you got Shadow from?" She wiped her eyes and stood, motioning him inside. Over cups of weak, sweet tea, she recounted a memory that seemed unremarkable to her, but struck Daniel like a lightning bolt. It was 6 years ago, after a terrible storm had ravaged Willow Creek. Roads were flooded, trees uprooted, and houses battered by fierce winds. Martha, then mourning the death of her husband, had felt an unbearable loneliness settle over her home. Days after the storm, seeking company, she visited Golden Paws Shelter, a small rescue center on the edge of town. It was there she found Shadow, a drenched, trembling German shepherd with deep amber eyes, huddled in a corner of the shelter, wary of strangers yet strangely drawn to her. "There was something in his eyes," Martha murmured, her gaze distant, as if she could still see that broken, beautiful animal in her mind. "Something that told me he wasn't meant to be left behind." Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. The timeline collided too neatly. 6 years ago was the same year Sam had died, the year a freak storm had swept through Willow Creek, the year Daniel himself had buried his loyal friend under the great oak tree at his old house. It felt impossible, yet each new piece of the puzzle made coincidence harder to believe. Could it be that Sam's spirit lived on somehow in Shadow? That after death his bond to Daniel was so strong it anchored his soul to the world of the living? Or was fate weaving a story stranger than fiction? He couldn't shake the memory of the way Shadow, a dog supposedly unfamiliar with him, had looked at him the night before with recognition and longing. Dogs didn't fake that. Their eyes were windows to something purer than words. "Do you remember anything else? Like who brought him in?" Daniel pressed gently, not wanting to alarm the elderly woman. Martha shook her head. "No, dear. The shelter manager said he'd been found wandering near the old river road after the storm. Nobody claimed him, so I took him home. That was it." Daniel remembered the old river road. It was close to his old house. Too close. A chill prickled his skin. Could the grave have been disturbed during that storm? Could Sam's body have somehow been lost, and his spirit drawn into this dog? The thought was absurd, something from ghost stories and childhood campfire tales. But Daniel had seen enough strange things in his years on the force to know not everything could be explained by logic alone. He thanked Martha, promised to stop by again soon, and left with a heavy heart. Shadow remained behind, though his gaze lingered on Daniel, as if unwilling to let him go. Driving away, Daniel felt a hollow ache in his chest. The streets of Willow Creek looked peaceful in the morning light, but inside him, a storm still raged. He needed to visit Golden Paws Shelter. Maybe records still existed, a name, a witness, anything to explain the impossible. Because the truth, however painful or fantastical, was better than questions that would haunt him for the rest of his days. As he passed the old oak tree where he once laid Sam to rest, Daniel slowed the car, his eyes blurring with sudden tears. Life was strange, and sometimes it left behind threads of unfinished stories, lingering like the scent of rain on dry earth, refusing to be forgotten. And Daniel knew deep down, whatever Shadow's true story was, it was far from over. The answers waited in shadows, between memories and miracles, and Daniel Hayes was ready to chase them to the end. Daniel's heart was heavy as he drove to Golden Paws Shelter, the place Martha Blake had mentioned adopting Shadow from after that terrible storm so many years ago. The storm was one of the worst Willow Creek had ever seen, tearing apart homes, uprooting trees, and leaving many lost and homeless, including animals who had no place to go. The shelter had been overcrowded, filled with frightened, wet, and hungry animals rescued from the streets. Some were pets, separated from their families, others had been strays all their lives, and some were injured or old, left behind in the chaos. As Daniel stepped through the shelter's doors, a wave of memories washed over him. The scent of old wood mixed with animal feed and disinfectant triggered something deep within him. He remembered bringing Sam here once for vaccinations years ago, back when everything had felt whole and right. The woman at the reception desk greeted him kindly. She was older now, her hair streaked with grey, but her smile was warm. Her name tag read Nancy, and though she didn't recognize Daniel at first, He introduced himself and explained the strange connection between Shadow, the old hurricane, and Sam's tag. Nancy's brow furrowed in thought, and she disappeared into the back to check old records. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours to Daniel. He could hear the sounds of barking and mewling from behind the doors. The air was thick with stories of survival and loss. When Nancy returned, she was carrying a faded logbook. "We don't use these anymore," she said softly. "But back then, after the storm, we kept track of every animal we found on paper. It was such a mess." Daniel leaned over the counter as she flipped through the pages. Finally she found an entry. A male German Shepherd, around 2 years old, no tags, no microchip, found wandering near Willow Creek Cemetery, the very place where Sam had been buried. The date stunned Daniel. It was 2 days after Sam's death. His throat tightened and his stomach churned. Could it be possible? Was this Shadow? But how could Sam's tag, buried with him, end up on Shadow's collar years later? Nancy explained that during the hurricane, many grave sites had been disturbed. Floodwaters had surged through the cemetery, lifting old markers and exposing burial plots. It was a grim, unspoken tragedy of that storm. Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Could Sam's grave have been one of those disturbed? He remembered the day he laid his loyal friend to rest under the great oak tree, placing the collar and tag alongside him, whispering a final goodbye. The thought that the storm could have unearthed that spot filled him with sorrow and guilt. He had left his best friend to rest in peace, and now it seemed that peace had been shattered. Nancy admitted that in the aftermath, stray animals had roamed freely through the area. It wasn't impossible, she said, that a young nameless German Shepherd could have found something, a collar, a tag, a scent, and clung to it. Daniel's mind raced. Was it fate? Coincidence? Or something deeper, something unexplainable? The shelter's log only added to the mystery. Shadow had arrived with nothing but a haunted look in his amber eyes. Eyes that were so familiar to Daniel, it hurt to look at them. Nancy told him that the staff had named him Shadow because he always followed one of the volunteers around, never leaving her side, refusing to be caged. That volunteer had been a teenage girl named Emily, and Nancy remembered how the dog would howl at night, standing by the window, staring at the distant hills where Willow Creek Cemetery lay. Emily had begged to adopt him, but her family had to move after the storm, leaving Shadow behind. Martha had come in days later, grieving the loss of her own home, and taken Shadow home with her. Daniel sat down on an old bench in the shelter's hallway, running a hand through his hair. The pieces didn't quite fit, yet the feeling in his heart told him they were connected in a way logic couldn't explain. He looked down at the collar and tag in his hands. The leather was cracked, and the name Sam Hayes gleamed softly in the light. How had this ended up on Shadow's collar, years after his supposed burial? Nancy was at a loss. "Some things, Officer Hayes, we're not meant to understand," she said gently, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "But maybe, just maybe, that dog found his way back to you for a reason." Daniel left the shelter with more questions than answers. He drove to the cemetery, the evening sun casting long shadows over the land. The great oak tree still stood, though its bark was scarred from years of storms. The grass had grown wild, and the ground showed faint signs of having been disturbed long ago. He knelt by the spot where Sam had been buried, tracing the old gravestone with his fingers. His heart ached with a longing that words could not capture. He whispered apologies and promises to his old friend, telling him how much he missed him, how life hadn't been the same since he left. Shadow, standing beside him, let out a soft, almost human sigh, and pressed his head against Daniel's arm. In that quiet moment, Daniel no longer cared about the how or why. The world was filled with things beyond explanation, mysteries that couldn't be solved with facts and reports. What mattered was the bond between a man and his dog, one that no storm, no passage of time, and no grave could break. He would take care of Shadow, not as a replacement, but as a bridge to the love he once knew. Somehow, in those amber eyes, Daniel saw both the pain of loss and the light of new beginnings. The shelter's secret wasn't just about a collar or a storm. It was about how love, in its purest form, refuses to die, how it can find its way through darkness, disaster and death, to bring two souls back together. Daniel had never been one to seek answers from anything beyond the logical, the rational, the concrete. But that was before Sam's death, before he had felt the deep, haunting emptiness that still lingered like a shadow across his every moment. He had been skeptical of the idea that some things, some bonds could transcend the physical, that memories or feelings could somehow cross time, space, and even death. But now, with Shadow lying at his feet, a dog that looked like Sam, moved like him, and even seemed to feel like him, he was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to the world than science and facts could explain. It had been a week since the call with Martha Blake, and the mystery surrounding the dog, this strange connection to Sam, had only deepened. It felt like the more he uncovered, the less he understood. Desperation clung to him like a second skin as he tried to piece together the impossible. How had Shadow come into his life so suddenly? And why did he seem to carry with him such a heavy weight of the past? Was it possible that, in some inexplicable way, Sam's essence, his spirit, was trying to return, to somehow reconnect through this new dog? His thoughts had turned to Dr. Laura Kane, a veterinarian who had once helped him with a stray dog years ago. She was known for working with animals who had endured trauma, animals who, in her mind, might still carry the emotional imprints of past experiences. He hesitated for only a moment before he reached out to her, the phone ringing in his ear. The connection was made, and the familiar voice on the other end seemed to offer a small measure of comfort. "Dr. Kane, it's Daniel Hayes. I need your help." There was a pause, and then a soft, knowing chuckle. "Daniel, it's been a long time. What's going on?" His voice trembled as he explained everything, how he'd found Shadow, how the dog acted in such strange ways, how the bond he felt with him was something deeper than just a pet and its owner. "I think this dog, he's connected to Sam. I know it sounds crazy, but it's like he carries something from him." There was a silence on the other end of the line, and Daniel wondered if she might dismiss him as a man who had lost his mind. But then, to his surprise, Dr. Kane spoke, her voice calm and professional, yet filled with something that sounded like understanding. "Daniel, what you're describing, it's called transference. It's a phenomenon where an animal, especially one who's experienced trauma or loss, forms a bond with something or someone that reminds it of what it lost. It's not science in the traditional sense, but there's a mystery in it. Animals have an incredible ability to connect with things, even on a deeper, more emotional level than we realize." Daniel felt his chest tighten as he tried to absorb her words. Could this be what was happening with Shadow? Could it be that the dog had somehow bonded with Sam's memory, perhaps even his scent or his spirit, and was now seeking out Daniel as a way to reconnect? "So, you're saying Shadow might have some kind of connection to Sam?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just a normal bond, but something more?" Dr. Kane's response was gentle but firm. "Yes, it's possible. Animals are intuitive in ways that we often can't understand. Their bonds with humans can transcend what we think of as normal relationships. This might not be a coincidence, Daniel. It's a mystery of the heart, something that science hasn't fully unraveled yet. But the truth is, sometimes, animals find their way back to us in the most unexpected forms. And perhaps Shadow is trying to find his way back to you, through your memory of Sam, through his scent, through something intangible but deeply felt." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over him. It was as if the answer, elusive and impossible just moments before, had been gently placed in his hands, not in a way that made sense, but in a way that felt right. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't imagining things. Shadow wasn't just a stray dog who had wandered into his life by chance. Shadow was something more, something tied to the very essence of his lost companion, Sam. He felt his heart swell with emotion, a mix of grief, longing and hope. "But why now?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. "Why has he come to me now after all this time?" Dr. Kane's voice softened. "Sometimes the healing process takes longer than we expect. Maybe Shadow needed to find the right person at the right time. Or maybe you needed to heal enough to recognize him for what he truly is. I don't have all the answers, Daniel, but I believe that what you're experiencing is real. And maybe, just maybe, this is a chance for you to find closure. Or even a new beginning. Her words seemed to echo in Daniel's mind long after the call ended. Shadow lifted his head, his amber eyes meeting Daniel's with an intensity that took his breath away. For the first time since Sam's death, Daniel felt the weight of his grief begin to shift. Perhaps in some strange, unexplainable way, he was finally being given a chance to heal, through this dog who had somehow found his way to him, through a mystery that seemed to transcend the boundaries of life and death, and through the bond that still existed, somewhere deep inside his heart, with the dog he had loved and lost. As Daniel looked down at Shadow, he whispered softly, "Maybe you're not just a dog after all. Maybe you're more like a bridge between Sam and me. Maybe in some way you're the answer I've been searching for." And in that moment, the dog gave a soft, almost imperceptible wag of his tail, as if acknowledging the unspoken truth that hung in the air between them. Daniel wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. Shadow was no longer just a reminder of the past. He was a part of it, a continuation of something deeper and more meaningful, and that in itself was a glimmer of hope he hadn't thought possible. Daniel couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that the story wasn't finished. Every unanswered question tugged at him like a loose thread waiting to be pulled. So, after dropping Shadow off at the station's kennel for the night, he headed back to his small apartment and spread out a mess of old papers, photographs, and files across the kitchen table. The glow from a flickering lamp cast long shadows across the walls as rain pattered softly against the window pane. Daniel pulled out Sam's old medical records, a map of Willow Creek, and the logbooks from Golden Paws Shelter he had borrowed earlier that day. He combed through shelter records from the year of the hurricane, cross-checking names of rescued animals, lost dogs, and found items. That's when a single entry made him sit up straighter, a note about a German Shepherd mix found near an old abandoned property on the outskirts of town, logged shortly after the storm. The address was familiar, too familiar. It was the old Collins family home. Years ago they'd lived down the street from Daniel when he was a boy, and their dog Buddy had been Sam's best friend. The two dogs had spent endless summers chasing fireflies, splashing in the creek, and sharing sun-drenched afternoons. But when the Collins family moved away, Buddy went with them, leaving Sam to pine by the fence for his old friend. Daniel hadn't thought about the Collins family in years, but now it felt like some long-forgotten memory was rising to the surface, pulling him toward the past. Early the next morning, with the rain still falling in a light mist, Daniel packed Shadow into his patrol car and drove out to the abandoned house. The place was a relic from another time, weather-beaten walls, sagging shutters, and a crooked front porch overtaken by wild vines. It looked like no one had been there for decades. As Daniel stepped onto the porch, the wood groaned under his weight. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood. Shadow's ears perked up, and without hesitation, the dog bounded toward the backyard. Daniel followed, heart pounding, unsure of what he was about to find. In the back garden, overgrown with brambles and tangled weeds, Shadow began pawing at a spot near the base of an ancient oak tree, the same type of oak under which Sam had been buried years ago. The parallel struck Daniel like a jolt. Kneeling beside Shadow, he brushed away the dirt with trembling hands until something cold and metallic caught the faint morning light. It was another dog tag. Daniel picked it up, and his breath caught in his throat. The tag was worn with age, its edges dulled, but the engraving was unmistakable. It read, "Sam Hayes." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. He turned it over and saw the same old address, his childhood home. How could it be? This was supposed to be the one buried with Sam. Yet now, here it was again, buried under the roots of an oak tree at a house connected to Buddy, Sam's best friend. Daniel felt a chill snake down his spine. He glanced at Shadow, whose amber eyes held a calm, knowing look, as if the dog understood something Daniel didn't. Clutching the tag, Daniel stood and surveyed the yard. Memories came flooding back. He and Sam, running through the same grass, leaping over the same stones, chasing Buddy across the fields. It was a piece of his childhood, a part of his soul that he'd long buried with grief. The idea that a tag identical to Sam's could end up here, in this forgotten place, was impossible by logic. But Daniel had stopped believing in coincidences. He walked through the abandoned house's crumbling interior, the floorboards littered with leaves and broken glass. In a corner of what used to be a child's bedroom, he found a faded photograph tacked to a wall, 2 boys and 2 dogs, Daniel and Mark Collins grinning ear to ear, with Sam and Buddy sitting proudly between them. The photo was yellowed with age, but it spoke of simpler, happier times. Holding the photo in one hand and the dog tag in the other, Daniel felt an ache in his chest, a bittersweet warmth curling around his sorrow. It was as if the universe was handing him pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed. When he stepped back outside, the mist had cleared, and morning light broke through the clouds, casting golden beams over the yard. Shadow trotted up beside him, tail wagging, a faint smile in his eyes. In that moment, Daniel realized this was never just about Shadow, or even about Sam alone. It was about connections, about the bonds that outlast time, storms, and death itself. There was something unseen at work, weaving their lives together, something old and sacred. The storm that took so much from the town had left behind scattered remnants of love and memory for those willing to search for them. Daniel knew he couldn't explain it with police reports or shelter records, but he felt it in his bones. He knelt by the tree again, placing both tags together at its base, whispering a quiet thank you to the past and the strange winding road that had led him here. He promised then to protect Shadow, not as a replacement for Sam, but as a new companion forged from the legacy of old friendships. The pieces of the mystery still didn't fit perfectly, but Daniel no longer needed them to. Some things were meant to remain mysteries, beautiful, aching reminders of what it meant to truly love and lose, and find pieces of yourself in the most unexpected places. As he and Shadow walked away from the Collins house, Daniel felt lighter, the burden of old grief softened by the warmth of new hope, knowing that somewhere, somehow, Sam was still walking beside him. Daniel remembered the Collins family's generosity after the storm, their warm home opening its doors to stray dogs in need, including a little pup named Lucky, who had a white patch on his chest and a crooked tail, just like Shadow. He'd always wondered about Lucky, how he'd found them in the chaos of downed trees and flooded streets, and how he brought so much joy into their lives with his playful antics, his wagging tail greeting every visitor, and the way he'd snuggle into their laps on chilly evenings, offering comfort and warmth. Now years later, as Daniel held Shadow and watched the crooked tail wag in perfect mimicry of Lucky's, he felt a lump in his throat, the floodgates of memory opening wide. He thought of the afternoon when Lucky first arrived at their doorstep, muddy and frightened, and the children Emma and Sophie had coaxed him inside with gentle voices and scraps of sandwich, while their parents dried him off and stitched a tiny patch over the tear in his ear. That was the beginning of a family bond forged in kindness, a bond that helped them through long nights of power outages and dark stormy skies. But what truly haunted Daniel now was his realization that Sam, Shadow's owner, had once visited the Collins home for a weekend playdate, bringing a box of toys and treats, and that those items, Shadow's favorite ball, the frayed teddy, the little blue blanket, may have passed from Sam to the Collins children, and then later found their way back to Sam, when she'd moved away, years after Lucky had grown strong and left them, perhaps adopted by a loving family, or wandering into the unknown. The thought that Shadow might carry a connection not only to Lucky, but also to Sam's childhood, woven through layers of memory and time, made his heart twist. Daniel pictured the day Sam and Shadow had come to the Collins yard, Shadow's paws leaving prints on freshly raked leaves, as Sam called his name. He saw Emma offering Shadow a new toy, a squeaky yellow duck they'd received at a birthday party, and how Shadow's head had tilted curiously, sniffing at it before nudging it towards Sam, who laughed and scooped it up. The toy then had stayed behind when Sam went home, or so they thought, until one quiet afternoon, Daniel found it tucked in the toy chest, covered in dust but unmistakable. They smiled, thinking of Sam and how fast children grow and memories fade, but never truly disappear. And now, as Daniel realized that Shadow's possessions might have crossed paths in that household, how magical that a simple toy could be a thread connecting 2 families, 2 dogs, 2 stories. He felt tears sting his eyes. He understood that rescue is never just saving a life, it's forming a network of love and hope, invisible but strong, linking people and animals across time and distance. He thought of Lucky again, wherever he was, hoping someone somewhere had given him a soft place to sleep, and hands that petted his crooked tail. He thought of Shadow, curled up beside him, and Sam, searching for her lost connection, unaware that pieces of her past might be scattered like breadcrumbs through the Collins memories. Daniel realized it was their chance to mend the gaps. He would call Sam, tell her what he'd found, give her the faded yellow duck and the frayed teddy bear, tell her about Lucky, and together perhaps they could bring all their stories full circle. Maybe Lucky could find his way back too, if only in memory, as they all gathered in the backyard, the sun setting gold over the fence, dogs barking in greeting, children laughing, and hearts brimming with the quiet magic of rescue and reunion. That single evening would knit together the past and present, Sam smiling as she held her old blanket, Emma and Sophie giggling as they introduced Shadow to Lucky's favorite spot under the apple tree, even if Lucky was gone. And Daniel, watching them, felt that elusive healing power of love, how it travels unseen, binding us to each other, to our pets, to moments long past, and how every discarded toy, every crooked tail, every memory held together, creates a rescue network far stronger than any storm. The patterns of giving and receiving, of loss and rediscovery, of stray and safe, had come back to them in one golden evening, uniting hearts in a silent chorus of hope. At the end of that night, Daniel counted the breaths in his chest, the quiet warmth spreading through him, certain that this was why they had welcomed Lucky all those years ago, to set in motion a chain of kindness that would ripple outward through dogs and people, stitching together broken stories until they glowed with new meaning. And though they might never find Lucky again, his spirit lived on in every wag of Shadow's tail, in every toy passed hand to hand, in the laughter echoing under the apple tree, reminding them that rescue is never ending. It's a network, alive and breathing, and this was the heart of their story. After all the sleepless nights, after chasing scattered leads and fragments of memories carried by the wind like loose autumn leaves, Daniel finally felt a shift inside him, as though the weight he had carried since the day he lost Sam was beginning to lift, not because the questions were answered, but because something more important had taken their place, something that felt like peace. And it all began when that old, worn tag was found by chance around the neck of a stray dog, in the dead of night, a tag that bore the name of a friend long gone, and yet somehow ever present in Daniel's heart. And from that moment a trail began to emerge, leading him through the tender, tangled threads of memory and grief that connected not just him to Sam but to others as well, to lives that had touched his without him realizing it. And it was through this trail that Daniel stumbled upon the story of Buddy, a gentle old golden retriever with kind eyes and a graying muzzle who had vanished years ago after a violent storm tore through the town, scattering families, memories and hopes like shattered glass across the soaked earth, leaving behind wounds that time hadn't fully healed. And Buddy's family, the Collins, had mourned him as best as they could, keeping his collar and old toys in a dusty box in the attic, telling stories about him to the younger children in the family who had never known him but loved him anyway. And it was through tracing shelter records, storm rescue logs, and old photos that Daniel pieced together what had happened, how Buddy had been picked up by a volunteer group during the hurricane, transported to a distant shelter hours away, his tags lost, his name forgotten, and how in that shelter was where Shadow, then a nameless stray with a crooked tail and a nervous heart, had crossed Buddy's path. And somehow through those brief days together in the chaos of rescue operations, Buddy's old tag, identical to Sam's in its sturdy brass shape and engraved letters, had made its way onto Shadow's collar, a small accident, or perhaps a kindness by a hurried volunteer, trying to give the lonely dog a name. And when Daniel realized this, when the pieces finally fit, he drove out to the address listed in the faded records, a small white house with a blue porch swing and wind chimes that sang in the breeze. And as he knocked on the door, an elderly woman with weary eyes opened it, and behind her stood a younger woman cradling a baby. And as Daniel explained who he was, what he had found, and what he believed, their eyes filled with tears, their hands trembling as they retrieved that old dusty box from the attic, pulling out pictures of Buddy, of the storm, of the volunteers and the shelter. And one photo caught Daniel's breath. It was of Buddy lying beside another dog, a scruffy black mutt with a white chest patch and a crooked tail, unmistakably Shadow in his younger years. And the connection was undeniable, and though the years had passed, though fur had grayed and eyes had dimmed, the bond these animals had shared lingered, and Daniel felt a warmth he hadn't known in so long, not the sharp ache of loss but the steady comfort of love remembered and honored, and together, with laughter through tears, they decided to hold a gathering at the old park where Buddy and Sam had once played, inviting families whose pets had gone missing in the storm, sharing stories, hanging pictures, lighting candles for those still lost, and it was there, on a soft summer evening, that Shadow, now fully Daniel's companion, sat beside him under the glow of fairy lights, his head resting on Daniel's knee, as the townsfolk came together, not to mourn but to celebrate, to remember the animals who had once filled their lives with unconditional love, and the people they had brought together, and in that moment, Daniel understood that while some mysteries might never be solved, while some questions linger in the silent corners of our hearts, what truly mattered was the enduring bond between souls, whether human or animal, living or gone, a connection that time could weather but never erase, and he felt Sam's presence there too, in the flicker of the candles, in the cool night breeze, in the steady heartbeat of Shadow pressed against his side, and as the families laughed and cried, and the park filled with the sound of remembered names and new friendships forged, Daniel knew that his journey had not been in vain, that every sleepless night, every road driven in the dark, every old record and storm-battered photograph had led to this, not the solving of a mystery, but the mending of hearts, the reunion of families with memories they thought lost, the rediscovery of what it means to carry love forward, even when those we cherish are no longer beside us. And as the last light faded from the sky and the crowd began to drift away, Daniel stayed a little longer, looking up at the stars, thinking of Sam, of Buddy, of the winding path that had brought them all together, and he whispered a quiet thank you to whatever force had nudged a stranger and a dog into crossing paths on that rainy night, for setting in motion a chain of kindnesses and coincidences that had filled so many empty places in so many hearts, and he promised to keep searching, not for answers anymore, but for opportunities to honor those connections, knowing now that love does not vanish, that memory does not fade, and that sometimes a single act of compassion, a chance encounter, a tag found in the dark, can lead to 100 small miracles, rippling outward in ways no one could have predicted but everyone could feel. And with that thought he stood, whistled softly for Shadow, and together they walked home under the quiet, watchful gaze of the stars. In the end, Daniel understood something he had fought so hard against for so long, that not every mystery in life comes with a neat, perfect answer, and some questions are meant to remain as gentle echoes in the corners of our hearts, unanswered but never forgotten. The world wasn't a puzzle that always fit together cleanly, and sometimes the pieces you gathered along the way formed a picture you never expected, yet one you somehow needed. As he stood in the pale morning light, his fingers brushed against the cool, worn metal of Sam's old name tag, the edges dulled by time, the letters faint but still legible. It felt like holding a piece of his own heart, one that had broken and healed in places, leaving marks of loss and memory. Shadow sat beside him, his deep amber eyes, so much like Sam's, watching the world with a quiet wisdom that Daniel couldn't explain. The wind stirred the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth, rain, and something old and familiar. Daniel knelt, attaching Sam's tag to Shadow's collar with steady, deliberate hands. The tiny click of metal on metal sounded louder than it should have, like the closing of a chapter, or maybe the beginning of a new one. Shadow tilted his head, and in that small, wordless moment, Daniel felt something ease inside him, a warmth that replaced the ache he had carried for so long. The pain of losing Sam would never vanish, but it no longer consumed him. It softened, making space for something else, a new friendship, unexpected yet inevitable, built from shared silences, unspoken understanding, and a strange, almost mystical bond that neither of them would ever fully comprehend. Together they began to walk, the path ahead uncertain but somehow less lonely. Daniel knew the road would have its shadows, as life always did, but now he had a companion who felt like both a stranger and a memory, a new chapter born from an old story. Shadow chased butterflies in the field, his crooked tail wagging, and Daniel laughed, a sound he hadn't made in too long, the kind that comes from a place deep within, untouched by grief or fear. He remembered the nights he'd sat alone by Sam's grave, the stormy evenings when the wind howled through empty streets, and the aching emptiness of a house without paw prints on the floor. And now, here was this dog, this unexpected visitor from fate's own hands, carrying with him traces of the past and promises of the future. The old oak tree where Sam rested still stood, its leaves whispering in the breeze, and Daniel paused to look up at its branches, feeling as though the world itself was giving him permission to let go without forgetting. He would always carry Sam with him, in the way the sun set over the hills, in the way a certain tune on the radio tugged at his heart, in the flash of amber eyes in the dark. But he had room now for new stories, for muddy paws and wagging tails, for unexpected detours and midnight walks, for laughter that didn't feel like betrayal to what was lost. He thought of the people he had met in this strange journey: Martha Blake with her weary eyes and gentle hands, the Collins family, whose kindness had once saved a stray, Dr. Laura Kane, whose belief in the invisible threads of love had given him hope, and even Buddy the golden retriever who found his way home after years apart. Each encounter had left its mark, threads woven into the fabric of his life, a tapestry of loss and love and mystery. Daniel reached the top of the hill where he could see the whole town below, roofs shining in the early sun, streets beginning to stir with quiet life. Shadow trotted to his side, leaning against him as though he belonged there, as though he had always belonged. Daniel smiled and whispered, "Come on, Buddy, let's see what's out there." And they did. They wandered through forgotten trails and quiet woods, over bridges where the river sang of old secrets, through fields where the sky stretched wide and endless. Each day brought something small but precious: a child's laugh, a stranger's wave, the scent of wild flowers, the warmth of a sunbeam falling through the trees. The ache in Daniel's chest faded bit by bit, replaced by simple joys, quiet moments that built a life. In those days, he found healing not in grand answers or dramatic revelations, but in the ordinary magic of a dog's companionship, the wordless loyalty that asked for nothing and gave everything. The bond between man and dog had always been one of the oldest and purest stories, and Daniel now understood why. It wasn't just about ownership or loyalty, but about hearts recognizing each other across time and space, about finding light in darkness, about loving and being loved in return. Shadow would never be Sam, and he was never meant to be. He was his own soul, scarred and shaped by his own trials, yet somehow carrying pieces of what Daniel had lost. In Shadow's steady presence, Daniel felt echoes of every dog he'd ever loved, every friend he'd lost, every version of himself that had stumbled and risen again. And so life went on, not in the absence of pain but in spite of it, with Daniel learning to welcome the new without betraying the old. He talked to Sam sometimes when the stars came out, telling him about the day's adventures, about the silly things Shadow had done, about the way the world still spun on even when hearts broke and healed. He liked to believe Sam heard him, running free somewhere beyond sight, tail wagging, waiting for the day they'd meet again. But for now Daniel was here, in this world, walking side by side with a dog who had come from nowhere and brought with him everything Daniel didn't know he still needed. A new beginning didn't mean forgetting the past, it meant carrying it with you, letting it shape you without chaining you, allowing love to find you again in unexpected forms. And so Daniel and Shadow kept moving, one step, one day, one memory at a time, through fields of gold and streets of grey, chasing light, chasing hope, chasing life itself, until the road finally led them home.